Okay, here I have just a mock-up of the framing that I did for the walls. So here's the fun part. This is where I talk about all the mistakes we made while building these walls. So the new framing starts right underneath this rub rail.
Hi, we're Josh and Emily with Aurora the Adventure Bus. Today we're going to be talking about the underbay walls of our build, which took us about 3 weeks or so of our 2-year bus build.
So in that 2-year bus build, we've also been living in the bus and traveling for about a year. So we have plenty of hours and miles on the bus, and the underbay has held up very well. But I do have some mistakes that I made and some improvements and things I'd love to do if we ever do another build. So stick around at the end of the video to find out what those are. When it came to designing the underbay storage area, we had a few design considerations and goals we wanted to achieve with it. The first one that we wanted to achieve was that we wanted to have a secure storage area for utilities and for bulk storage that we don't need all the time. So to do that with the walls, we wanted to have thick enough steel on the walls that they won't be easily broken into or pried into with a crowbar. And we also wanted it sturdy enough that if you're in a minor accident or something, it doesn't destroy your whole underbay just from having someone run into it. Or, well, a funny example we had was we parked in a Walmart parking lot, and it was a very windy day, and the wind started coming from the wrong direction. It was blowing shopping carts at 10,
and they
15.
were like shopping cart missiles. They came and gathered speed across the whole parking lot.
Yeah, so they're hitting the vehicles around us and all that. You try to run out and catch them, but they're hitting at about, 10 or 15 mile an hour with just shopping carts. So kind of an odd, obscure reason to do it, but we wanted to make sure we had a nice solid underbay. We also wanted to have a underbay that was able to be heated year-round.
That's because we usually go home to South Dakota to spend the holidays, Thanksgiving, and Christmas with our families. So we're usually parked somewhere on their property, in their driveway, something like that, where it's really cold. And so we wanted to make sure that we could still be in our home without inconveniencing them, but still be around and have those memories.
Yeah, so we ended up insulating the underbay with 2 inches of insulation, and we were able to heat it enough that we survived, and we kept the underbay above freezing when the outside air temperature was negative 35 degrees Fahrenheit. So it allows us to we don't have to winterize our RV when we're back home. So it was really good for us in that respect to have a nice climate controlled underbay storage area.
And then the last item that we wanted to hit on was we wanted to lower the center of gravity of the bus so that it didn't wobble and teeter as much as we're going down the road. So to do that, we added more weight and substance to the lower portion of the bus because all of our utilities, minus our water tank, are in the storage area.
Along with all my tools and all the heavy items that we don't use on a regular basis. And it pretty much offsets having the raised roof and the solar up on the roof when we have the underbay built.
When it came to the build, we had several design considerations that we decided to implement. One of these was the Jeep rule. And so this is just a rule of thumb where you take the diameter of your tire, and 1/3 of that is how much clearance you should have from the ground. So that's what we tried to use when we were doing our underbay framing, and actually our step for our entry is the lowest part of our bus. So that's...
Mm-hmm. It ended up having about 1 foot of ground clearance underneath the length of the underbay. The Jeep rule works pretty good, but when you start getting the long wheelbase vehicles like the bus, it probably doesn't work as well. But like we said, our biggest problem with ground clearance is the front door, which is factory. So it works really good. We haven't had any problems getting over approaches or anything like that with the underbay height. So the next thing we want to do is we wanted to make it robust enough that if a tire blows, that it doesn't tear into the underbay or damage anything that's inside, like all our utilities. So when it came to framing the actual the walls of the underbay by the wheel wells, I ended up using 1/4 inch wall 2x2 tubing and did that on like 6" on center spacing. So it's basically like, I don't know, it looked like prison bars before I put the metal on. And then we did 1/8" plate on that, so that if a tire blows, which on a semi truck or a bus like this, when a tire blows, it is almost like a hand grenade going off. There is a ton of energy captive in those tires because they're at 100, 120 PSI. And when they blow, most semi trucks actually have frangible fenders that are designed to break and get out of the way so that they don't damage something else.
So that's why we bulked up that metal framing so that it didn't hurt any of our utilities inside.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that we decided to do when we got deeper into the framing of the bus is we wanted to make sure we had weep holes on all of the structural tubing that we used. So when you have a steel tube and you don't have any way for water or air to exchange in it, it'll end up rusting out very quickly. So on all of the tubing that we did, I always made sure I had some sort of out for the air or water to get out. So I ended up drilling holes in the bottom of a lot of the framing members after we got it installed. So the last design consideration we had was clearance in the wheel wells. We wanted to make sure the wheels had enough clearance so that if they were turning, like the front axle in particular, if you're turning and hit a bump, the axle actually slides backwards or shifts backwards with the suspension travel. So we wanted to make sure we had clearance there, and also we wanted to have clearance if we had tire chains on, because they take up a substantial amount of width in addition to the tires when you actually are going down the road. So that was our last major design consideration on the bus. Okay, so here we are in SolidWorks. You may recognize this model from my frame rail video. Well, we're going to keep adding to it with part of the floor of the bus for now. The front and back portion are atypical or not standard, so I'm not going to model those quite yet. But the main floor of the bus is all made out of these panels. So you can see the highlighted orange boundary is one panel. So they're all just lined up end to end or side to side, and they are connected together. I think they have a few rivets through the side of these L-shaped portions of the panel. And then they're also connected on either side by these big metal flanges. I have this one transparent right now, so you can kind of see what's going on. But on the other side of the bus, I have it solid. So that's what it'll look like if you were to pull the skin off of the bus. This piece of metal connects the floor of the bus, and it's riveted down along the length of this flat part. And it also connects the hoops that make up the walls and roof of the bus. They get riveted to the side of this also. And then I don't have this modeled, but at least on my bus, this piece of metal extended up and then went in towards. So it went up and then over, up, over, and back, kind of like making a shelf. And that's where the seats were riveted to it. So, yeah, that's kind of, you can be able to recognize that piece of metal by that, probably. So that metal chunk is actually pretty important because it is what secures the underbay to the bus, basically. So I'm going to show my underbay now. So now that the underbay is being shown, you can see that it runs between the wheel wells pretty much the whole way across on either side. And what you can kind of tell here is that the underbay has the skin of the underbay, which is my 1/8" sheet metal, extends up, and this is where I was able to rivet through the rub rail, through my underbay material, and then through this piece of steel, creating a nice steel sandwich, which is pretty strong. Between the 1/8" of sheet metal here, the skin of the bus, which I don't have modeled, the piece of metal for the connector here, and the rub rail, it's a pretty solid, I don't know, 3/8 to almost pushing probably 1/2 inch of metal all connected together. So it's a very strong connection. I also made it stronger by, in the underbay, welding the top of my frame to the underside of the floor along each of these joists. And then I also, while I was building it, I ended up just using bolts through a couple spots, tying the floor to the underbay, and that allowed me to build the underbay walls in place and then take them off to paint them. They weren't permanently attached from the beginning. So now I've isolated just the underbay walls, and this is looking top down on it. The rear of the bus would be the bottom, and this is where the fuel tank is. And the fuel tank runs to about here, and this space is just empty. At the front here, I had to dodge around the suspension components because I wanted to be able to grease them. So I needed a little extra space on this side of it. This is where I had all my tools stored and stuff like that. The underbay walls that wrap the fuel tank, I did not insulate the actual between pieces of sheet metal. It was just riveted right onto the framing that went around the tank. Here's the garage area, just kind of a simple construction there. And then down here, this is where I have my air dryer, so it had to dodge around that. And let me show you another view here now. Okay, so now that we're at a kind of a different view looking from the back of the bus, this is where the air dryer bump out is. And what I'm not modeling in here is that the frame rails run through here, and kind of cut through here. So it's one of the areas where I didn't quite model it perfectly. So I don't have any of the doors modeled yet, but this is pretty much the basic layout. If I were to go to the sketch, let's do a top-down view. So this is the back of the bus. You can pause the video if you want to see my dimensions. These are approximate because I measured them after I was done. Take them with a grain of salt because your bus is probably different. So that's pretty much the underbay layout. I'll show you how I constructed the walls now. Okay, here I have just a mock-up of the framing that I did for the walls. So there's basically two types of walls. There's structural tubing. This is modeled as 2x2. I think I had some 2 by 1.5 inch tubing also. But basically just made a box and infilled as needed with tubing. And then the other method I did was some 1 inch by 2 inch C-channel that I just welded 2 inch by 3 inch angle iron to. So that's pretty much the wall framing. There's some weird spots where I used 1 inch tubing, but for the most part, this is what it looked like. So all the tubing was 1/4 inch wall. Same with the C-channel. The angle iron uprights were 3/8. So way overbuilt for what I needed, but it's going to be strong. I wanted it so if the bus high centered on this underbay, it wouldn't crush it. So attached to the walls, I welded on, this is 1/8 inch sheet metal. And yeah, basically most of it's attached from the back side. I just put a weld bead every 6 or so inches holding this on. And then I just ended up cutting my doors out from that. The sheathing extends past on the ends, and that is so I can put the mud flap here, and it's not super visible from the outside of the bus. It also extends past on the bottom, and that creates a nice drip edge and a finished look so you don't see the floor of the bus. And like I've already said a couple times, the top I left long so I could rivet through. So overall, this is a nice, strong construction for the underbay. So now that we've done the design intent, considerations, and shown my design, let's actually go out and build this.
I see you, how you cross my mind. Honey, it's true, I think about you all the time. I recall we went walking in the autumn breeze. Your eyes danced when you saw the color of the leaves. How do you fish out a well from a river so shallow? Reach in and pull light from a thicket so hollow. How you see the world in so much. How you see the world in so much. How you see the world in so much. How you see the world. Fish out a well from a river so shallow. Reach in and pull light from a thicket so hollow.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to give you an update on the progress I have on this underbay. I have most of the framing done on it. We're to the point now where I am going to just go around, finalize things, and check my welds and make sure I have everything welded up good. And then we'll pull it apart and get it ready for paint. But I'm going to walk around and show you guys how I did this and my framing and my methodology for the underbay here, and how I constructed it so that in the future I can pull it apart if I need to work on something or change it, or I want to be fairly flexible on the layout underneath. So it's been about a week and a half of welding in the evenings, so I am more than ready to pull it all off and get it painted and put it back on for good. So okay, I'll show you guys around. So in this side of the bus, this is the passenger side, right in front of the rear axle. What I did here is I boxed around the duals, and then the suspension components come forward, so I jogged it about 2.5 inches towards the front of the bus. Jogged it up front there, and then bolted it to, I have a vertical upright right here that is bolted to the frame, and these, like the end wall, and then this wall that boxes around the air dryer, those are bolted to there, so I can take those off. So I can unbolt the whole air dryer box and get it out of the way. This end wall will be rigid because it is welded to the frame, the side skirt frame. So that is going to be all one piece, and that side skirt will be welded because I'll have all the tin that will run down to the storage bay doors. So my 2x3 angle iron, so the 2-inch side is right here, and that's welded on, and then it gives me plenty of a flange to bolt to, so I'll bolt the floor panels down. But up at the front there, I did something similar. I'll bring you guys over there. So up at the front here, it is a little bit more interesting. The suspension on this bus pivots to the rear when you hit a bump. So that spring hanger, I think that's the terminology. This spring hanger will pivot to the rear, so I need plenty of space back here to allow for movement of the steering and the axle and all that. So I boxed it out. It is bolted to the fuel tank that subframe there. It's bolted there, and it's welded up to the side skirt here. And I'm not sure exactly what my layout will be, but this would be a great spot for electrical or something like that that's tucked in behind this door here. So I have a little bit of framing. I have another piece of angle iron to put in down there, and yeah, just little odds and ends. Make sure I got all my tack welds welded solid. But all these walls will have sheet metal put on the outsides, and then 2 inches of foam put in between. Then I'll put sheet metal on the inside also. So it should be fairly well insulated and fairly quiet. It's going to be fun going around this fuel tank, but I'll bend some sheet metal up to fit along the sides of the fuel tank itself, and then put the foam in, and then more sheet metal. So then I have to sneak at the top here. I'll have to sneak an air duct in to get to the front of the bus, but that shouldn't be too terribly difficult. I'll bring you around to the other side. So this side is a little different. So up front here I have the framing pretty much done for the air conditioning coolers. So they'll fit one on top of each other right there. And then right behind that is where the air conditioner themselves will go. Those are the two that were hanging up in the cabin of the bus. So back here is the rear of the bus. I have one black water tank that will fit on the other side of the frame, all the way on the other side of the bus, up on the top. We'll have two hanging here, and this will be where all of my black water tanks will empty out, will be through this door. So I will have plenty of room for utilities. I have everything else will fit on, hopefully on this side, and if not, it'll be between or underneath the frame rails of the bus. So. So now that you saw us build the whole underbay, I want to quickly mention that I have a list of all of my favorite tools on our website. Link is in the description. And now let's go and check out the final product. So here we are at the rear of the driver's side of the underbay. So the new framing starts right underneath this rub rail. And as I showed you in the SolidWorks model, I have a tab on the actual sheathing of the bus that protrudes up past the rub rail or behind the rub rail. And it's riveted along here. So it ties the rub rail, the original bus sheathing, the inner sheathing of the floor panels, and the underbay all together into one sandwich. So that ends up being about almost a 1/2 inch thick steel when it's all sandwiched together. So that's a nice secure method of holding the underbay up. It's not our only method, as I will show you in a bit. But one way to check to make sure our underbay isn't failing or about ready to fall off is these rivets will start popping out first, probably. So when I go on my pre-trips, I always check that. So this is the rear axle of the bus. And I'll talk about it later, but I probably should have left some more space here. It is enough for tire chains, but barely. And to keep down on noise and prevent rock chips and all that, I end up mounting some mud flaps to the actual underbay wall, and that keeps them in pretty decent shape. So the sheathing we end up using for the skin of the underbay walls was 1/8 inch steel, just a mild steel, sheet steel. And I left it protrude past my underbay framing on the bottom and the sides. That way you have a nice sharp edge when you're looking at it and not a rounded corner. And it's been holding up really nice. It looks better that way. And also the water has a nice spot to drip off when it runs down the bus instead of wrapping underneath the bus. It's just a little thing, but it's every little bit helps. So in this video, we're only going to focus on the walls, of course. So I won't mention anything about the stairs or the doors. We'll cover that in a future video. So here I have one of the doors open so you can kind of see the thickness. So the actual walls are just over 2 inches thick. I was able to fit 2 inches of insulation in the walls. The bottom rail does not have any for the door, but you can see how thick the walls are. That, allowed us to stick our insulation in there and keep a nice solid structure to our wall. We ended up using, for the skin of all of the inside of the wall, we used the old roof tin from the bus. So you can see a little bit on this air handling box of ours. But yeah, that skin covers all of the walls of the bus on the inside. So behind our ventilation system, you can kind of see the wall sticking out. I have 1 inch insulation just screwed right to the wall, but behind that is our fuel tank for the bus. So I decided not to have the underbay run all the way underneath the fuel tank because I didn't want any fumes or issues to crop up there. So I ended up boxing all the way around it, just screwing sheathing to the framing that was on the fuel tank supports. So here we have our little garage area. It was originally intended to be a spot for air conditioning condensers to fit, but we ended up not using those. So it's a spot where we fit our generator, spare fuel, and our propane. So like I said, we wanted to have the propane in a spot that was ventilated, and that if it ever does need to vent, that it's not venting into our underbay storage area. This framing is not nearly as beautiful as the rest of it, as we did a lot of this on the road or when it was home, but it was negative 20 degrees out and I was trying to get stuff done. So it's a future project to get all this painted up. And this was originally just a bolt-on screen, not supposed to be a door. So it doesn't look as pretty as it could be. But you can kind of see tucked in behind the gas tank here is the actual diesel fuel tank of the bus. So we had to work around that. So the underbay wall actually, for the heated portion, stops right there. So here you can see the C-channel that we ended up using for the framing on the bottom and top of the underbay walls for the long portions. It's just 2 by 1 inch C-channel. And you can also see some of the weep holes I drilled in. These are just to get water out of the seat channel, but I also have the same size hole drilled in all the bottoms of the underbay framing members so that water will drain out. So right here is the steer axle of the bus. Behind that is the underbay, the garage area. Here's another one of our mud flaps we mounted to the underbay. And behind it, I end up using a rust prevention product. I think it's CRC rust prevention product. So that keeps rust from building up in a spot where it's not as well ventilated. And we have 2 winters and I believe 8,000 miles on this, and it's not rusting yet. So that's pretty good stuff. So this is one of the main reasons why we wanted the underbay, is to store all my tools in it. So I want to show you guys the back wall framing. So let's get some of these tools out of here. Okay, so that's a small sampling of my tool collection, but I wanted to show you guys the framing here. So back behind this wall is the fuel tank. So this is one of the only areas I didn't have this insulated, because this area doesn't have any water running through it, so I didn't really care as much. So it's just old recycled skin from the original side skirts of the bus. But then I had the jog here because of the suspension. And then it comes back, and there's just a little bit more storage there that I wouldn't have had if I just went straight back. Honestly, it's probably not worth it to have made all this jogging, but it's kind of nice to have the storage, I guess. So like I've been saying, because of the fuel tank, the front portion of the underbay is narrower than the back half. So this is about 26 inches deep, but back here, at the 3rd and 4th door, it goes all the way across, and we have it full of stuff, of course, but we can get totes all the way in, and we have our tanks and other things back there. So now that I've given you the tour of the final build, let's go back to the camp chair and I'll tell you where I made mistakes. So here's the fun part. This is where I talk about all the mistakes we made while building these walls for the underbay. Probably the first one, it's kind of a mistake, it's also kind of an improvement, is changing the steel thickness and maybe even the steel type for the underbay framing. So the steel we used on the underbay construction was 1/4 inch wall structural steel tubing, mild steel, and it is very heavy. It's also pretty strong for its weight. You could get a better grade steel that you could go thinner and have the same strength, but I think it's probably overkill. It was one of the first framing projects I did on the bus, and I definitely didn't want to undersize it. So we probably could have went down to a 16 gauge or 12 gauge steel and been just as happy with the final product.
And saved a lot of weight on our overall bus weight.
Yep.
Just with that.
Because I believe I have about 1,200 pounds of steel, or a little bit more than that, in that underbay. So that's a large portion of the overall bus build weight. So if I were to ever frame an underbay again, I might look into using aluminum instead of steel. You'd end up probably using 1/4 inch wall aluminum, but you'd be much lighter overall. But you do run into some corrosion issues and different metallurgy fatigue issues and cracking that comes with aluminum. So I don't know if I would do that or not, but it's a consideration.
That happens when aluminum meets other kinds of materials, such as what the rest of the bus would be framed with.
Yep. I'd also probably change the framing method and make it a little bit more efficient. I end up using a lot of square tubing where I could have used angle iron or something that's different shapes that accomplish the same thing I'm trying to do with much less steel involved. Like I said, it was one of the first framing things I did on this, and I overbuilt it like crazy. You could probably jack up the whole bus off of the underbay framing and you wouldn't have any damage to it. So another thing that I would have done differently, knowing what I know now, is to create our little garage area, so the area behind the mesh. So originally the bus came with air conditioning, and it had the 2 condenser cooler units, or the outdoor units, underneath the bus, and I was going to add those back in there. So the space was sized just for those units. But I ended up not doing that, and that's where a generator and extra fuel are stored now. And I wish I had changed the layout just a little bit and maybe made it a little taller. Other things that, and like the door isn't, I made the door on the road, so it's not really how it should be or how I would have done it if I built it in the shop. So that would have been nice to actually dedicate a small amount of the under bay storage area as a garage that's open to the outdoor elements. Another thing that I did wrong that I should have probably known better, but at the same time was the first thing I did, was to leave more room around, especially the rear axle, for an alignment. We ended up doing an alignment on the bus. I guess a couple years after, we ended up doing the framing on the underbay, and the alignment shop said that they would have had an issue or a challenge to align the rear axle with conventional methods. They would have had to kind of estimate it because they can't get all their tooling on to actually work on it. So definitely a consideration that you want to think about when you're building an underbay. So now this is the section where I think of things that would be really cool to have, or I wish if I were doing it again, I'd probably think about these different features or aspects of the build that I didn't incorporate on this one, which I wish I had. So I would have liked to have secured the walls of the underbay to the body of the bus a little bit, not better, but differently, just so I'm not, it's one of those things in the back of my mind that kind of worries me, or I still think about as we're bouncing down the road. It's riveted every, I think, 6 or 8 inches or 12 inches along the skin of the bus. It's also bolted and welded, but I could have done some bigger bolts and some tabs and kind of secured it just a little bit more where it wouldn't be a concern of mine. So I always check. I'm sure the first thing that would happen is some of the rivets were to pop out, so I'm looking for that as we're doing our checks on the road. So the second area of improvement that I would make is I would leave more room around the air dryer. So the air dryer is a key part of the air system on the bus, and it purges air or water and oil out and it's really important to be able to service, and I have it in a very challenging spot because it's located right in front of the rear axle, so it's in kind of like the back of my underbay storage area. And I have a bump out for it, but I think I have to pull that bump out if I want to ever service that unit. So if you're building it on your own and then having a mechanic work on your bus, they would really curse having that framing the way I had it. But if it's only me that's going to be working on it, it's whatever. But so the next thing is that I would simplify the layout. I spent, I think, about 3 or 4 weeks to frame this underbay. I probably could have done it in 2 if I had simplified the layout, not trying to get every square inch of space for the underbay, and just shrunk the layout just a little bit. Like at the front I have a couple jogs, and at the rear it jogs also. If I had just nice straight walls all the way around, it would be slightly smaller. Like I'd probably be able to fit half a tote less of stuff, so it's not even that much space. But yeah, it really didn't end up gaining me much for the amount of work I put into it.
I think you were just over ambitious because it was your first project and you were excited to get back into metalworking again.
Yep.
So you enjoyed the challenge of it.
Yep. So, and the last thing would just be a luxury item is some RVs and coach buses have sliding drawers. So you just open your underbay door and then just pull out, and your whole storage, all your totes or whatever, are all on this, basically a drawer base, and you can just pull it out and access anything. So that would have been nice, but is not necessary. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns about our underbay walls or the overall build, just leave them in the comment section down below and I'll try my best to answer them for you.
If you like this format of video, feel free to like, comment, subscribe on our videos, and we'll keep making more.
Yeah, catch you on the next one. Thank you.